Have you ever gone an entire day without doing anything physically difficult and still felt completely exhausted? Not tired, exhausted. You slept enough. You ate well. Nothing catastrophic happened. And yet, by the time you returned home, it felt as though something inside you had been quietly drained. Most people blame work, stress, modern life. Carl Jung believed something much stranger. He believed that one of the greatest sources of human exhaustion is not what we do, it is who we pretend to be while doing it. Think about how many different versions of yourself exist. The version your family knows, the version your coworkers see, the version you become on social media, the version you become around strangers, the version you become when you're afraid someone might reject you. Now ask yourself one question: which one is actually you? Carl Jung called this psychological mask the persona. The persona is not evil. In fact, without it, civilization could hardly function. It allows us to cooperate, to belong, to survive. But something dangerous happens when the mask stops being something we wear and becomes something we believe we are. At first, the change is almost invisible. You laugh when you don't find something funny. You agree when your heart wants to disagree. You smile while quietly falling apart. You say, "I'm fine," so many times that eventually you stop asking yourself whether it's true. Then one day, your body begins saying what your mouth never could. The exhaustion appears. Not because life became heavier, because carrying someone who isn't you is. By the end of this video, you may discover that the tiredness you've been trying to fix with more sleep, more motivation, or another vacation has never been physical. It has been psychological. Because nothing drains the human soul faster than spending years performing a life instead of living one. Imagine an actor who steps onto a stage every single day. At first, the costume feels strange. It scratches the skin. The lines are difficult to remember. The smile feels unnatural. But day after day, the performance continues. Years pass. The first time you learn to hide, no child enters the world pretending. Watch a young child for 5 minutes. They laugh loudly, cry openly, dance without embarrassment, ask impossible questions, feel everything. Nothing is edited, nothing is calculated. Then something changes. The child discovers that love sometimes has conditions. Don't cry, be polite. Good children don't do that. People won't like you. You should act more like your brother. Little by little, the child begins making an extraordinary discovery. Some parts of me are welcomed. Other parts must stay hidden, so the psyche does something brilliant. It creates a mask, not to deceive people, to survive them. That mask becomes polite, responsible, funny, successful, strong. Whatever receives acceptance becomes part of the costume. Everything else is quietly pushed underground. Jung called those rejected pieces the shadow, not because they are evil, because they have been hidden from the light. Every mask creates a shadow. Why success can feel empty? There is a strange phenomenon that many successful people experience. They finally achieve everything they once wanted: the promotion, the house, the admiration, the recognition, and instead of relief, they feel strangely disconnected. Why? Because the person receiving the applause is often the persona. Imagine spending 20 years building a magnificent house, only to realize you built it on someone else's land. From the outside, everything looks impressive. Inside, something feels borrowed. This is why external success doesn't automatically create inner peace. If the achievement belongs to the mask, the soul remains hungry. Jung believed that the self, the deepest center of the psyche, cannot be satisfied by rewards meant for the persona. The mask may smile, the soul remains silent. Emotional debt. Think of your authenticity like a bank account. Every time you ignore your own truth to become who someone else needs, you make a withdrawal. One conversation, one fake smile, one unnecessary apology, one yes, when your whole body wanted to say no. Individually, they seem insignificant. But years later, you begin wondering why you feel emotionally bankrupt. Nothing dramatic happened. No single event broke you. You simply kept spending from an account you never replenished. This is why exhaustion feels so mysterious. The body isn't only carrying work, it's carrying contradiction. Every day, you ask it to support two different people, the one the world expects and the one quietly waiting beneath. Maintaining both requires enormous energy. Eventually, the psyche begins sending signals, not punishment, information, the anxiety, the numbness, the loss of motivation, the constant fatigue. Sometimes they are not signs that something is wrong. Sometimes they are invitations to stop performing and start listening. The most dangerous performance. Not all masks look confident. Some people perform perfection, others perform helplessness. Some perform intelligence, others perform endless kindness. Even suffering can become a role. Perhaps you've met someone who no longer knows how to exist without being needed, or someone who cannot enter a room without becoming the funniest person there. Or perhaps that person is you. The persona doesn't care whether the role is glamorous. It only cares that the role keeps you safe, because safety was the reason it was created. The tragedy begins when survival habits become life strategies, because what once protected you can quietly prevent anyone from ever meeting the real you, including yourself. The day your body starts telling the truth. The human mind can keep a secret for decades. The body cannot. That is why psychological exhaustion often arrives long before conscious realization, long before you admit, I'm living a life that doesn't fit me. Your nervous system already knows. It whispers first. You wake up feeling tired, even after a full night's sleep. Conversations that once felt effortless suddenly leave you drained. Weekends no longer recharge you. You begin fantasizing, not about success, but about disappearing for a while, not forever, just long enough to stop pretending. Most people assume they're burned out. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they are simply exhausted from maintaining an identity their soul no longer recognizes. The weight of constant editing. Imagine recording yourself every second of every day. Before speaking, you replay every sentence in your mind. Will they approve? Will they misunderstand? Will they think less of me? Should I sound smarter, kinder, more confident, less emotional? Now imagine doing that for 10 years. Eventually, you no longer experience life. You experience your own performance of life. Carl Jung understood that consciousness requires energy. Every decision, every thought, every emotional suppression draws from the same limited reservoir. When that energy is constantly spent editing yourself, very little remains for actually living. That is why authenticity feels surprisingly energizing. Not because authenticity gives you more energy, because it stops wasting it. The person who never gets to speak inside every human being, there is a quiet observer, not the employee, not the parent, not the successful one, not the failure, something much deeper. Perhaps you've caught brief glimpses of this self late at night, walking alone, watching the rain, traveling somewhere unfamiliar, moments when nobody expected anything from you. For just a few seconds, you felt strangely peaceful, not because life changed, because the performance paused. Those rare moments are often mistaken for escape. They are actually recognition. The real self doesn't usually shout. It waits, patiently, sometimes for years, waiting for the noise to become quiet enough that you finally notice it has been there all along. Why we fear being seen. It seems strange. Almost everyone says they want to be accepted, but very few people want to be fully seen, because acceptance can happen through the persona. Real intimacy cannot. To be deeply known means risking rejection without the protection of the mask. That is terrifying. Imagine standing on a stage without a script, no rehearsed personality, no carefully chosen words, no image to protect, just you. Many people fear that moment because somewhere deep inside they still believe, if people knew who I really was, they would leave. That belief is rarely born in adulthood. It is usually planted in childhood. Perhaps honesty was punished, sensitivity was mocked, anger was forbidden, curiosity was ignored. The child learns, hide this part, and decades later the adult calls it their personality. But personality is not always identity. Sometimes it is survival that has simply lasted too long. The cost of being universally liked. There is something our culture rarely questions, the desire to be liked by everyone. At first, it sounds noble, kindness, politeness, harmony. But beneath that desire, there is often another one, safety. Because if everyone approves of you, perhaps nobody can hurt you. Yet life doesn't work that way. The more universally acceptable you become, the less uniquely yourself you remain. You slowly sand away every sharp edge, every unusual opinion, every inconvenient truth, until eventually there is almost nothing left for anyone to truly know. Jung once observed that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. Notice, he didn't say the easiest task or the safest one, because becoming yourself almost always requires disappointing the version of yourself that existed only to keep everyone else comfortable. And that disappointment is not failure, it is freedom beginning. When the mask finally comes off, there is a myth that transformation happens all at once. That one morning, you wake up, throw away every mask, and suddenly become your authentic self. Real life is quieter than that. The mask rarely falls off, it loosens. One conversation at a time, one honest answer at a time, one boundary at a time, one moment when you stop saying yes just to avoid disappointing someone. Authenticity is not a dramatic event. It is the gradual removal of everything that was never truly yours. The mirror. You avoided, imagine, standing in front of an old mirror, not to fix your appearance, not to judge yourself, just to look. For years, you've only glanced at your reflection long enough to make sure everything looked acceptable. Your smile, your clothes, your expression, everything arranged for the outside world. But today, you don't look at your face. You look behind it. You ask a question few people ever ask themselves. Who am I? When nobody expects anything from me. Not your profession, not your achievements, not your failures, not your responsibilities, not your reputation. Who remain when every role becomes silent? Most people have never met that person, not because they don't exist, because they've been too busy introducing everyone to the mask. The courage to disappoint. One of the strangest signs of psychological maturity is becoming comfortable with disappointing people, not through cruelty, not through selfishness, through honesty. There comes a moment when saying the truth feels more loving than maintaining a performance. Some people will misunderstand you, others will leave. A few may even become angry, not because you've changed into someone worse, because you've stopped being who they expected. This is one of Jung's deepest insights. Every authentic life requires symbolic deaths, not only the death of old beliefs, but the death of old relationships, old identities, old expectations, even the old image you had of yourself. Every death creates space. Every empty space invites something real. The energy returns. Perhaps you've noticed this in certain people. They don't necessarily speak the loudest. They don't demand attention. Yet when they enter a room, everything feels calmer. They are not trying to impress anyone, and somehow that makes them unforgettable. What changed? They stopped dividing themselves. For years, their energy was scattered, maintaining appearances, managing impressions, suppressing emotions, editing thoughts. Now, all of that energy has returned home. The same energy once spent pretending is now available for living. This is why authentic people often appear peaceful, not because life became easier, because the civil war inside them finally ended. Becoming whole. Carl Jung did not believe the goal of life was happiness. He believed the goal was wholeness. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means there is no longer a battle between the person you show and the person you are. Imagine two rivers flowing separately for years, one carrying your public life, the other carrying your private truth. Eventually, they meet. From that point forward, there is only one river. It still encounters rocks, storms, sharp turns, but it no longer flows in two directions. That is psychological freedom, not becoming someone different, finally allowing all of yourself to move together. Perhaps your exhaustion was never asking for more sleep. Perhaps it was asking for less pretending. Maybe the heaviness you've carried wasn't caused by responsibility. Maybe it came from carrying a version of yourself that no longer fit. The world will always reward performance. It often has no idea how to recognize authenticity, so don't measure your progress by applause. Measure it by how quiet the argument inside you has become. Because there comes a day when you no longer wake up wondering who you should be. You simply wake up and begin living. Not perfectly, not fearlessly, but honestly. And honesty requires far less energy than pretending ever did. So, before you leave, I want to ask you one question. Don't answer it for anyone else. Answer it for yourself. If you never had to impress another person again, who would you become? Sit with that question, because the answer may be the person who has been patiently waiting beneath the mask your entire life.